Hello everyone, welcome back to Ask Juliana. I'm Juliana Manzanares, an attorney here at Ibarra Maldonado Law Group. This week we're going to take a little break to talk about cancellation of removal, and instead we're going to talk about bonds, how you get one, the kind of things that you would want to submit in your bond packet. And I kind of wanted to make the little segue because I feel like lately it's been a lot of consults and family members and clients that have unfortunately been detained, and it's something that you hope that never happens, and sometimes unfortunately it does. So I wanted to give you a quick overview of how the bond process works and what you would need to submit to the judge and kind of the information that they're looking for. So in Arizona, there's a few detention centers. I'm just going to talk about three or four of them. That way you kind of know what the process is. So generally, let's say someone's driving down the street and they get pulled over for a traffic violation and they get a horrible officer that decides to call ICE. What happens then? So usually what happens is they wait for ICE to get there. The person is then taken to the Phoenix Detention Center, which is really a holding center. It's not really a detention facility, where essentially ICE decides at that point, which is right here on Central and Palm Lane. So what ends up happening is ICE interviews the individual, and they say, where are you from? How many kids do you have? Have you ever been arrested? They look at the immigration history, and ICE at the Phoenix facility has three options at that point. Well, four. They can release the individual OR, which means own recognizance. They don't have to pay anything. Essentially, they're just promising that they're going to come back and check in with ICE whenever ICE says that they need to come back and check in. That would be the best scenario that could happen. They could give them a monetary bond. So they say for $5,000, call somebody, they can pay the bond, and then we'll release you. They can decide to not give you a bond and instead transfer you to an actual detention facility where you would have to request a bond with an immigration judge. Or if you have a prior deportation, they might try to reinstate that deportation order, essentially saying you've already been deported once, so we can deport you again. So those are kind of the four options that ICE has when an individual gets detained. So let's talk about what happens if ICE decides to not give them a monetary bond or release them OR. So what ends up happening is they get processed through the immigration system. They all from there go to what's called the Florence Processing Center. The processing center is the first place that someone's going to go to. And again, when they get there, ICE has the determination again about whether they're going to give them a monetary bond or give them no bond. It's kind of, I've seen it be a little rare that you get a monetary bond at the processing center. They usually say no bond, and you're either going to stay at the processing center or you can get transferred out to any detention facility in the country. Here in Arizona, literally right across the street, there's an immigration detention center at CoreCivic America, which is a Florence detention center. Then there's the Eloy Detention Center about 35 minutes down the road, or they can stay at the Florence Processing Center, or they could transfer them out to any other detention facility in the country that has space. I don't really know how they make that determination, but it's one that happens. It's happened to us here a few times where they were sent to Colorado or California. I had one person be transferred to Louisiana. I don't know how they make those determinations, but they do. So once they get to wherever they're going to be housed, we'll just use Eloy as an example. What ends up happening there is ICE again has a determination about whether they're going to give you a bond or not. If they don't, then what you have to do is ask for a bond hearing in front of an immigration judge. And let's say they do at the La Palma Correctional Center, which now has a contract with ICE for 1,000 beds. ICE has been giving monetary bonds. The issue with those bonds is they're astronomically high. They're in the $50,000, $70,000, $80,000 range where they know the individual can't pay them. So really, they're kind of better off just not giving them a bond and asking for it in front of an immigration judge. So if ICE does give you a bond and it's really high and, as the family, you can't afford to pay it, what you can do is ask the judge to reduce the bond, the amount of the bond. That can be risky sometimes because an immigration judge can revoke the bond, essentially saying, you know what, no, I'm taking the bond away. He or she can give a higher bond amount than what was already there, or, do what you're asking, and that would be reduce the bond. So once you ask for a bond hearing, whether ICE already gave you one or not, the process is pretty much the same. You submit a motion, a petition for custody redetermination. That's what the title is, essentially saying to the judge that this individual is now requesting a custody hearing to determine whether they should stay in detention or not during the pendency of their immigration case. After you submit that, depending on the detention facility, they call you a few weeks later to schedule the bond hearing, and they let you know who the judge is. And usually they start around 10 a.m. And then you get your bond packet together. So at a bond hearing, what you're proving to the judge is that the individual is not a danger to the community and that they don't pose a flight risk and that they're not a threat to national security. That usually goes with danger. So with danger, what judges are looking at is immigration history, criminal history, any orders of protection that they might have, and for what. So things that you might want to submit are court records, if there is a conviction in that person's history, to show that they've complied with everything that they need to comply. If there's any classes that they needed to take, certificates that they completed the classes, and then letters of good moral character. So essentially people that know the individual, that can attest to that person being a good person, that they're involved, that they're hardworking, they're responsible, whatever that may be. So you have to get past danger in order to get to flight risk. So once you can prove to the judge that your individual is not a danger to the community, then you say, judge, this person isn't a flight risk either. So that essentially means that if you let them out on detention, that they will go to their court hearings and they'll do everything that they need to do because they know how important it is to them. With flight risk, judges are looking for family, U.S. citizen or LPR family members, the length of time that they've been here in the United States. Do they have stable employment? Do they own a house? Do they own a car? Do they have any immigration relief? So is there a defense for them that would give them the incentive of going to court if they have something to fight for? These are all factors that judges take into consideration. Is not by any means an exhaustive list of what it would be. At the end of your argument, the government then makes an argument about why they're a danger or why they're a flight risk. Sometimes it's either or, sometimes it's both. And then at that point, the judge will give you a decision that day about whether they're going to let them out on a monetary bond or not. The other thing to keep in mind when it comes to bond hearings is that every detention facility has different judges. Different judges require different things. There's some judges in Eloy that require police reports, some don't. So it's also a matter of just knowing your judge and knowing what kind of irks them and what they like to see. So one of the other factors that judges consider when talking about flight risk is whether they have a sponsor. So what that means is that it's a permanent resident or U.S. citizen that's willing to give them shelter, food, pay a bond if necessary. Essentially someone that if they're released, they are going to be in charge of this person to get them to court, to pay the bond, whatever it might be. In other words, just to help them out. Like there's somebody here that can help them out. For the sponsor, what you want to submit is proof of ID, an affidavit of support, essentially saying just that, I'm so-and-so, I work here, I know this person, this is how I know this person, and I'm willing to help them out. Now, let's assume yay that you get a bond. So what now? The sponsor, even though they say that they are going to be the ones to pay the bond, they don't necessarily have to be, especially if they're working or whatever that may be. It just needs to be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident that's over 18. And they would take a cashier's check or money order paid out to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, to any ICE facility that would be able to take that payment. What they need to show then, or what they need to know, they need to have some ID. They at least need to know their social security number. It's always better if they take their social security card. The cashier's check for the amount of the bond. If it's over $10,000, it can only be in one cashier's check. You can't separate them, $5,000, $5,000, and $5,000 has to be just one. And bonds need to be paid before 3 p.m. The other thing is that it can be paid to any ICE facility in the country. So let's assume that the sponsor is in New York and the person's detained in Eloy. They can pay it in New York. They don't need to find someone to pay here, or even here. If the person's detained in Eloy and the family members are in Phoenix, they can pay it in Phoenix, down here on Central and Palm Lane. It's really just any ICE facility that's willing to take the payment. And once they receive payment, it usually takes about 24 hours for them to process them out, and then they get to go home with their families. So thanks for watching. Join us next week. We're going to resume our cancellation of removal. We'll be talking about good moral character and what that means, and certain criminal convictions that might kick you out of that, unfortunately. So stay tuned.